Welcome everyone to our Sunday night service here at Center Point Road. And if anybody's listening on the internet, we welcome them too and hope to get you to see you in the near future. Well, tonight I wanted to think about Caleb. And with Matthew's first lesson in Judges, we read some about Caleb. And that reminded me that I've always thought he was inspiring and interesting character in the Old Testament. So tonight I would like to see if we can learn some from his example. One thing I thought about was that Caleb must have had a great faith in God. In Numbers 13, God told Moses that he should send out 12 men to explore Canaan because he was going to give them this land to the Israelites. So a leader was picked from each of the 12 tribes. And Caleb represented his tribe, Judah. Moses told the man to look at the land, see if it was any good for farming or if it had poor soil, how many people they had. Was there a bunch of people or very few people? Were they tall? Were they weak or strong? And what about the cities? Were they walled or were they unwalled? Were they heavily fortified? Even telling him about the trees. And Moses said, do your best to try to bring some fruit back. And we'll see that they did. They found some grapes in Canaan that were so big that they cut down one bunch or one branch of the grapes, and they stuck it on a pole, and 2 men had to carry it on their shoulders, I guess. And the men were there for 12 days exploring this enemy country. And we're going to see that 10 of them said that, oh no, there's giants there. They're from the Anakites. I think there was the same country of people that Goliath had come from. And they all live in big cities, and they're walled cities, and there's just no way. Well, Caleb had been there, and he'd had enough of that. And he's in Numbers 13:30, he says, Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, we should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. He seemed to have a totally different attitude, along with Joshua, than these other 10. The others, they said, no way, we can't do it. They're bigger, they're badder than we are, there's just no way. They're all great soldiers, and they're all really tall. They totally talked down the idea of conquering the land, which is why God brought them out of Egypt 40 years ago. The 10 spies who did not trust God, they got the whole community, the whole nation, all upset and afraid. So much that Moses and Aaron fell down on the ground, and Joshua and Caleb tore their clothes. They were pretty upset with these people. And Caleb said, don't rebel against God, because with God's help, that's the main thing, with God's help, we can take the land. Well, those 10 spies, they spread rumors and talked to the people so much that they got the people in such an uproar that they were even talking about stoning Caleb and Joshua. And that got God to talking about killing all of them with a plague. Lucky for them, they had Moses to plead for their case like he had done before. Numbers 14:24 says, but because my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly, I will bring him into the land he went to, and his descendants will inherit it. I noticed that the NIV said wholeheartedly. The New American Standard says follow me fully. This is a man that followed God. He had a large faith. So this made God say that none of the Israelites over 20 years old, except for Caleb and Joshua, would get to enter this promised land. The rest of the Israelites would just wander in the wilderness for 40 years. 1 year of wandering for each day that the spy mission had lasted. After all those people that were over 20 years old, after they died, then the people would be allowed to go and fight and take Canaan. And the other 10 spies, besides Joshua and Caleb, they were killed with a plague. Later on, when Caleb wanted to claim his land that he was allotted by Moses and God, he said in Joshua 14:8, "But my fellow Israelites who went up with me made the hearts of the people melt in fear. I, however, followed my Lord wholeheartedly." And that's what Moses said too. And right after that, in verse 9, Joshua 14:9, "So on that day Moses swore to me, the land on which your feet have walked will be your inheritance, and that of your children forever, because you have followed my Lord, my God, wholeheartedly." And in Joshua 14:14, it says, "So Hebron has belonged to Caleb, the son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, ever since, because he followed the Lord, the God of Israel, wholeheartedly." Another thing that Caleb had a lot of, I believe, was patience. He was just 40 years old, seems young to me now, that when he went to explore the land. But because of the other 10 spies and all the people of Israel that believed in them and listened to what these guys had to say, who had just ignored all that God had done for them, all the miracles and the manna and the divided Red Sea, they just forgot about it. Because of those people and the 10 spies, he had to wander around in the desert for 40 years with all those rebellious Israelites, and then another 5 years. So Joshua 14:10 says, "Now then, just as the Lord has promised," this is Caleb talking, "he has kept me alive for 45 years since the time he said this to Moses, while Israel moved about in the wilderness. So here I am today, 85 years old. I am still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I am just as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then. Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day." He's talking to Joshua. "You yourself heard then that the Anakites were there, and their cities were large and fortified. But the Lord helping me," there it is, the Lord helping me, "I will drive them out just as he said." Just because Joshua said you can have the land, well, that wasn't all there was to it. You had to go and fight these Anakites who were all tall people. Then Joshua blessed Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and gave him Hebron as his inheritance. So Hebron has belonged to Caleb, son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, ever since, because he followed the Lord, the God of Israel, wholeheartedly. And the last thing that I wanted to think about Caleb was that how generous he was. He had drove out the people living in the town of Hebron, and then he wanted to take over another town called Kiriath Sepher, and he offered his daughter to the man that could attack and capture that town. Well, it turned out his nephew, his brother's son, Othniel, took the city, and so he got to marry the daughter. Later on, his daughter asked him for some springs, and he gave, this was in the where their land was called the Negev, and it was like the desert, or at least the semi-arid area of Israel. So I guess they needed a spring, and Caleb was generous enough that he gave her the upper and the lower spring, so 2 springs. Joshua 15:19 says, he's talking about, this is his daughter talking. She replied, "Do me a special favor," to her dad. "Since you have given me land in the Negev, give me also springs of water." So Caleb gave her the upper and lower springs. And that made me think about how when we're stingy or lack of generosity, that was counted as a sin in Deuteronomy 15:9 says, Be careful that there is no mean-spirited thought in your heart, such as the 7th year, the year of release of debts, is near, and your eye is malicious toward your poor brother, and you give him nothing, that he may cry out to the Lord against you, and it will be a sin in you. If we remember, they had a thing where they had like a Sabbath of years, and if you had loaned somebody some money, well, after 7 years, the debt got canceled. So this is Moses warning them, when it gets to be that 5th or 6th year, don't look at your brother and say, no way, I'm not loaning you any money in the 6th year. I'm going to have to cancel the debt just in another year. No, go ahead and be generous with your poor brother. I think that's what Moses was getting at. So we can see that the Lord required the people to be generous with those, even if they had little. And Deuteronomy 15:10 says, give generously to them and do so without a grudging heart. Then because of this, the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and everything you put your hand to. Sometimes some of us might feel like, well, I'll give something, but I might have a little bit of a grudge about it. And then I like this proverb, Proverbs 11:25. It says, a generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes other will be refreshed. And in the New Testament, generosity is also praised. In Acts 10, verse 1, it says, at Caesarea there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion in what was known as the Italian regiment. He and all of his family were devout and God-fearing. He gave generously to those in need and prayed to God regularly. This guy wasn't a Jew, he was a Roman, and he still gave to the people that were in need, even though he lived around mostly Jews, I would think. And he still prayed to God. So I was thinking, what could we learn from Caleb? Well, hopefully we learned that he followed God with his whole heart. This is a man that believed that God would do for him what he said, and he had faith in God his whole life, it looked like, at least for 85 years. And he patiently waited those 45 years of waiting for his land. So he patiently waited for the Lord to keep his promise, just as we wait patiently for the Lord's promise of Jesus' return. And the last thing, we can see that Caleb was generous with others. He had given his son-in-law some land. His daughter asked for a spring, and he gave her 2 springs. So I think that he was probably a real generous guy. And one more thing, this is just an extra free thing you don't have to pay for, but I didn't know where to put it, but it seemed to me that maybe we could get from Caleb, at least for those of us that are over 50 or like me over 60, that Caleb still had faith in God and was still willing to do God's work. I mean, if the Jews were going to live in Palestine or Canaan, the Canaanites living there, they weren't really on that plan. They were wanting to stay there. So it took a fight. I mean, this is with swords and spears. This is not just like, well, God said that we were supposed to get the land. That's not how it worked. So even after he had waited 45 years, but now he's 85 years old, and I mean, he still did what God wanted him to do. Take the land so that the Israelites could live there. And so I hope that we can have the kind of faith and the kind of patience and the kind of generosity that Caleb had. So let's stand and sing.